everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How Did We Not Know That? I'm Nat,
I'm Jack.
and today Jack is going to tell us about some cool event in history. I have no idea what it is yet.
Yay! Oh, I didn't tell you. It's I'm gonna cover the apartheid in South Africa.
Oh, that's right. You actually did tell me. Ooh.
I'm excited for this one. This is like a very I don't know, it's like a special episode. That's like the last country I traveled to was like South Africa, so it's still fresh, just like seeing the huge difference in class. But okay. So, what is apartheid? Nat, do you know what apartheid is? Can you explain it to everyone?
Isn't it basically like, so South Africa, it was like divided up, and there were places where Black people could live, and then places where like white people could live, and then it's like also almost like a caste system where like people of, like, if you're white versus a person of color, like you would qualify for different jobs. So like if you're a person of color, like you wouldn't be able to do certain jobs, right? I
Yeah,
don't
no,
know.
exactly.
Didn't, like, when you were talking about your time in South Africa, weren't you also saying that like there's another class of like colored people who are
Yeah.
like half Black, and that's like a whole other separation?
Yeah, no, literally. I feel like we talked about apartheid already together as friends. So like
That's
I've
true.
already told you everything about my experience, but it's fine. Okay. So that's good. Yeah, you have a really good understanding on it. So apartheid was a system of institutionalized racial segregation that existed in South Africa from 1940 oh, not 1914 from 1948 until the early 1990s. So it didn't end till like 1994 officially, which is really, really recent to have racial segregation. And it wasn't just like mild racial segregation, it's like very strict um, segregation of people. So by race. Anyways, so apartheid is an Afrikaans word that means separateness. And Afrikaans is a language that's spoken in South Africa, and it comes from the Dutch colonizers. So we're going to go back into some South African history to have like a better understanding, because some people still, when you hear South Africa, they think it's like Africa, right? So everyone's Black. And then if you meet a white South African, you're like, what? You're from Africa? Which, like, first off, Africa is not a conglomerate country. Like, they're different pockets. But anyways, so South Africa history is really long, like way longer than the United States. In 1488, the Portuguese get to South Africa, but the local tribes and different groups of people in South Africa actually killed all of them. So that's just like a fun fact piece of history. Yeah, so they arrived in like 15th century, so 1400s, to enslave South Africans. Which, when I say South Africans, I am talking about all of the different groups. There's like Zulus and can I do the click? It's like Xhosas. There's just like a bunch of different tribes, so I'm just referring to that. But yeah, they like killed all the Portuguese. Then in 1652, so like over 150 years later, the Dutch arrive to South Africa, and then they open up a Dutch East Indian Company port in Cape Town in 1652. So that's when the Dutch arrive. And when the Dutch arrive, technology has like grown for the Europeans, so they're a lot better at the slavery thing, and they start the slave trade as well. However, they start importing slaves from East Africa. So there's of course like a collection of slaves also in South African region, but a lot of the slaves, which I discovered too when I was like touring the museums, they imported them from like Madagascar and the East Indies. So like Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesian area. And like later, oh, this is interesting. Okay, I just put in a fun fact, but like the Dutch colonized Indonesia, if anyone didn't know, and then the English colonized Malaysia. And so but Malay is like an ethnic group. So when I say Malay, it's not just people from Malaysia, it's people from Malaysia and Indonesia, like that Southeast Asian region. Anyways, slavery ends in 1834 with the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833 from the British Parliament banning slaves. And like, even though the Dutch are really, okay, how do I explain this eloquently? So the South Africa was colonized mainly by the Dutch, but actually the English too, in partnership. So for a long part of history, the Dutch and the English were like fighting over control of South Africa. And in 1833, it just happened to be that they were under English rule. And when that was outlawed in like the United Kingdom or in England, all British territories like banned slavery. So that's when it got banned in South Africa as well. So although slavery ends, there's now this minority group of white colonizers and a black majority. So then we start to enter the time of the white minority like seizing control over all of it and like figuring out a way to stay in power.
Yeah, because like they're like, okay, slavery's over, but they're not gonna be like, all right, have your own like democratic government and like, yeah, you guys should run for office and
Right, exactly. They're not like, yeah, let's all live together now. Like that's not what it's about. So in 1834 to 1948, I'm just going to give some brief history because 1948 is when we officially start apartheid. So the events leading up to it, during that time, there's a lot of discovery of natural resources, which is like, natural resources, and like they discover diamonds and gold. So because of that, it's more important for them to have control so they can like economically gain from ruling the area.
they control the resources.
Mm-hmm. So during this time, white South Africans were forming political groups only for white people, and they're seizing control of the resources, the gold and the diamond mines, and the wealth is like getting concentrated just for white people. So during this time, there are also activist groups that are formed by Black South Africans to protest. And in 1914, laws outlawing Blacks from owning or occupying land unless under the command of a white master was ran by the National Party, which was a political group run obviously exclusively by white people. So that was a policy that they made it illegal for you to own land, which, as you may or may not know, is like the way to build wealth is to own property, because then you can farm the land and then you have products to trade. So that's a pretty bad law. It's like very insidious to keep the Black community poor.
Yeah.
So yeah, before apartheid officially starts, there's already segregation between white and Black people in South Africa, and that's really visible in urban areas. But when we get to 1948, that's when things like officially get put in place, like very clear, strict laws. So one of the political parties known as the National Party, who were responsible for that 1914 law, excluding anyone who's not white basically from owning property. The National Party is a pro-Afrikaner, which is the white Dutch South African, and they came to power with the ideology of apartheid, because government's run by white people and they're like, hey, let's like separate ourselves through a system of like laws. And then the other white people were like, yeah, that's a good idea, and that's how they came to power. So segregation is already a thing, like we said, but apartheid is this really authoritarian and rigorous approach to enforcing the segregation. So like, think of American segregation, how bad that was before the civil rights movement. It's like that on steroids. Like, it's really, really bad. So basically, it's just white people running the government and using force to make up their rules and seize resources. And so apartheid, which is a really important idea to grasp, is that it's like racist, first off, like no question, but it's also economically motivated, because now that slavery is illegal, how do you get cheap labor to mine all the gold and the diamonds that they found? So they have to keep people poor so they can use them as cheap labor. So that's a big reason why you keep them from owning land, And then you separate them into specific groups, and specific groups can only work certain jobs. So yeah, it's like horrible. And the Black opposition politics, however, are forming, most notably the African National Congress, which started a youth league in 1943 to start fostering the leadership of young Black people like Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, and Nelson Mandela. Okay, so now we're just going to talk about what's apartheid like. Like, how bad is it? What did they do? Okay, so the government made people carry IDs or passbooks. They're like actually called passbooks. And they tell you what race you are. And it's purely based on appearance. So the classifications that they had were white, Black, and then another group called colored, because there's this colored group is a special Black and white mix that emerges through just like marriage and like having children. Not even marriage, that was outlawed, but like just like having children and like intermixing. Colored people just like emerge. And also in my research I found that like a fourth category was later made called like Asian, to like include Indians and Malays. But that's when I was doing like when I was like walking the museums and stuff, that I didn't see any Indian passbooks or Asian passbooks. So Indians and Malays were also under the colored group. So if you're not clearly white, you're not clearly Black, you're like shoved into colored.
Like just miscellaneous.
Exactly. And you know, some people, when they're mixed, it's not always clear like what they are. Sometimes like some, if you like, you could like look with my sister and like whatever, but like some people look more one side than the other. It's not always super clear to tell. So they created like fake tests, fake science tests, to determine if you weren't European, if you looked like you could be mixed. So do you have a guess like how they would test that maybe?
Oh my gosh. Well, I know, like, oh my gosh, I think like around this time period, I'm like thinking of like social Darwinism when they were so focused on like anatomy and like skull shapes, but I don't know how you would like test that on like a living person. So
Yeah,
they don't know, but I'm sure
like
it's some
measure your skull.
yeah, ridiculous. Like,
Yeah. Okay, so it's called the pencil test. And what they would do, they had a few different tests, but this is like by far the most famous test that they would do. So they would put a pencil in a person's hair, and if it fell out, then you passed the test and you were considered white. But if it stayed in your hair, then you were considered color.
what the heck?
Yeah. So they did it based on like your hair texture.
That's ridiculous.
Isn't that wild? I was like,
Oh my God. And like this stupid, like, it's just like so silly. And like, I don't know. First of all, I can't imagine like you're in like some important like government office and then they like just come up to you with like a little like, oh my gosh, like a little yellow pencil. But then like the fact that like that determines your class in society, which has like obviously like that affects the whole rest of your life and then like your children's lives, you know, that like has a generational effect, and it's all based on like if a pencil stays in your hair.
yeah,
That's ridiculous.
I know. It's crazy. And it's like, yeah, it's a huge deal. Like being white in South Africa it's like you're like top of the world, king and queen, like everything's awesome for you. But like if you're colored, like it's completely different. So it's literally just on the pencil.
Yeah. Well, okay, you're probably gonna get into this next, but like what's the difference between colored and Black, like in terms of what they can and can't do?
Yeah, I'll get into that.
Okay.
I guess like yeah, we'll like go through it.
Yeah.
But basically the other things that they did in apartheid, so once they figured out what group you were in, that was marked on your passbook. And then everyone who was non-white had a curfew. So if you're colored and if you're Black, there's a certain amount of time you're allowed to be outside, and then after a certain time you're not allowed to be outside anymore, and it's like by your passbook, and if they saw you outside past your curfew, you would be jailed or fined.
Oh my God. I
Yeah,
had never heard of that.
yeah,
That's insane.
it's that's what I'm saying. It's like it's segregation on steroids. Like they're controlling literally like everything. So also too, the passbooks, right? If you're not white, so you need to always have your passbook on you, because the police are allowed to do like a raid on you and like a search at any time they want. Like they can bust down your door and ask for your passbooks, and if you don't have it, again, you could be jailed or fined. Like, and it's
Yeah.
only for non-white people, so coloreds and blacks. Like if you're white, you don't have to worry about any of this.
Yeah. Jeez.
So yeah. And then officially interracial marriage is illegal, but also interracial sex. Okay, well, I guess I'm young, so like I guess at the time it was like you can't have sex if you're not married. Well,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, interracial sex and marriage is illegal, and that's just between whites and non-whites. So it's very similar to
Mm.
the um the
Love it.
segregation laws that were in Virginia in or the interracial marriage segregation laws in the United States as well, where it's just whites and non-whites can't mix.
Yeah.
And yeah, so then there's segregated beaches, segregated mountains, segregated benches, bathrooms, water, faucets, everything. Like you're not allowed to go to this beach, it's only for white people. You can't go to that mountain, it's only for colored people. Like all these things. Um Also, in schools, segregated, of course, the non-white majority only got a fraction of the funding as the white schools, which is like, of course.
Yeah.
Um,
Same thing like with all like the beaches and mountains and benches. Like, oh, like of course the ones for non-whites aren't going to be like maintained and it's not going to be like the nice places.
exactly, exactly. Okay, now this is the worst part of apartheid, though. Obviously, everything's horrible, but this is probably like the saddest part. And I didn't really understand it till I like kind of had to like reflect on it, and there's like museums completely dedicated to what happened, but basically there were forced removals. So the government forcibly removed people from their homes and made them live in specific areas, and this is like the reason why this is the worst thing is because this will push you into poverty. Like where you live and what like access to jobs and resources you have in that area can push you into poverty,
Yeah.
or keep you there. So the government forcibly removes. Okay, let me start again. So there's basically they designate different areas for like white people can live here, colored people can live here, black people can live here. Black people have to go move to an area called the homelands. So the government forcibly removes them, pushes them to the homelands. It's more than 3.5 million people, and the homelands were located in areas that didn't have any jobs or resources, and there's very little water in those areas, or it was polluted, and they forcibly made them live there. So leave your house and
Wow.
go. Exactly. So now they're pushed into poverty. You don't own your house anymore. Like if oh well, you couldn't own it anyway because 1914, but like you didn't
Uh,
have a chance to like own or occupy land. They took it from you, pushed you off to the side, and then they kind of like what we did to the Native Americans. And
when you were describing that, because like, sorry, not to interrupt, but like current day, like present day, like reservations, like there's so many issues with like access to water and like electricity and basic utilities and like food sources, and yeah, so it's just very similar.
yeah, huge parallels. Basically the same thing. It's like same oppressive practices. And we did the Native American thing we did first. Like this is like in the 1940s, 1950s. So like these guys are kind of copying. Anyways, so yeah, when you're pushed into poverty like that, it means that you now have no choice but to work as cheap labor. Like the only jobs available are mining the gold and diamonds for the white minority. So that's what you have to do now.
Yeah.
So that's where they live. The coloreds get moved to slum areas. So District 6 is they built like a huge museum off of District 6 to like talk about what happened, but it was like an area in Cape Town where 60,000 residents were forcibly removed. And I was like reading through the museum on like all the stories of the people who had been removed, and they would say like the movers would literally come and you could only take what would fit into like a truck, like whatever this truck is, and it's like really your whole family stuff.
Yeah.
And if you didn't like if you didn't pack it up or whatever, they would just like still make you move out, like just forcibly remove you. And whatever you didn't take, like everything else got demolished. So if you didn't have time to grab everything like within the allotted time that they gave you, then you just lose it all.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so yeah, that whole residential area got demolished. And now the government is trying to fix the wrongs. Like, this is as of last year when I was there, there's like a huge project going on, and they're trying to rebuild that area into like affordable housing so that people who were forcibly removed can return. But yeah, so colored people have to move into these slum areas. And the goal is basically of all this forced removal is to make sure that 4 million whites in South Africa had all the jobs, wealth, resources, and minds in their hands.
Hmm.
So now, on a more positive note, like, what did people do to oppose that? Like, that's horrible. So like, how are you going to fight up against that? So
Yeah.
people never took this like sitting down, you know what I mean? Like, people are always protesting these injustices, and especially throughout apartheid, they got organized politically. So we see the formation of the South African Indian Congress, Colored People's Congress, and African National Congress, like we talked about earlier. That was the group Nelson Mandela was in. And resistance to apartheid came in the form of mostly nonviolent protests. In 1952, there was something known as the Defiance Campaign. So it was the first large-scale, multiracial political mobilization against apartheid laws. So the idea was, let's break the apartheid rules to get arrested and then overwhelm the criminal justice system.
Wow.
Yeah,
This
so that was the plan.
approach.
Yeah, it's really interesting, but unfortunately it did not work. So it just ended up being that, like, yeah, a lot of people were in jail now. In 1960, they did the passbooks protest, which was like burning your passbook or not carrying it and then offering yourself up to the police for arrest. Like, hey, I don't have my passbook, like arrest me or whatever. And that led to the Sharpville Massacre, which was an event where police opened fire and killed 69 unarmed protesters, as well as wounding 300 more protesters. And like, at first they were telling people like the protesters were like throwing rocks and like the police felt threatened, but actually when you do like a biopsy of the bodies, they found that the gunshots were like in their backs. So it's like even when they were running away, they weren't seizing fire.
Why this all sounds really like way too familiar. Like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so then we have like a famous trial, like a court trial, and they're called the Rivonia Trials. And that starts to draw national attention. So with the Defiance Campaign, obviously like leaders, like the white people are like, who's leading them? Like, who do we need to arrest to get control again? So in the Rivonia trials, the trials accused various anti-apartheid leaders for treason and sabotage, and these trials are what led to the sentencing of Nelson Mandela to prison for 27 years.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
right.
27 years. 27. I'm not even 27. Like, that's your entire life.
For protesting.
Yeah. For leading like the protests and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And they're like, you're like, it's treason against South Africa. Like, so you like because you're standing up for your rights, that's treason against your country.
Yeah, because you're fighting against the oppressive white government. Oh my god.
Exactly.
7 years. Did he actually end up I guess you'll probably get into it, but like, how long was he in prison for?
27.
He still
27 years.
full sentence?
Yeah. No, he was supposed to be there till death.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see.
And he served 27 years. Like, he was supposed to rot in jail.
I can't. Oh my gosh. Okay, now, okay.
Yeah, so, like, it's bad. It's really bad.
Like, I would still have 5 more years,
Yeah,
like, left in prison. That's a horrifying thought.
literally. And it's not just, like, Nelson Mandela, like, all these anti-apartheid activists, like, all jailed, you know?
Uh,
So, all right, so he's in jail, but those trials, the Rivonia trials, like, the world starts to notice that something's happening in South Africa. Like, there's protests and stuff. They're like, what's up? So the rest of the world is like, what the heck? It's like 1990s. Like, how is it still segregated? Right. So basically, all the other countries put economic sanctions on South Africa. So other countries around the world refuse to do trade until they end apartheid, and there's a divestment of companies from South Africa. So there's a huge global movement to boycott South Africa until they end apartheid.
that must be insane too, because like the original motivations for everything, like obviously people are just racist and awful, but like it's an economic venture, and so as soon as it's not, I don't know, as soon as like the economy starts hurting and there's like economic consequences, then that's when they're like, okay, I guess we'll have to rethink some of this, you know?
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. And like, I just watched a documentary on the Holocaust like yesterday, and like the Holocaust was also economically motivated. Like, the reason the huge genocide happened is because like Germans cared more about like economic growth of Germany than the fact that like literally 11 million people were going to be murdered. And that's what happens when you care more about economic growth over human rights. So anyways, yeah, so if you had a South African passport, you're not allowed to enter other countries. And I have an auntie in South Africa. I refer her to that. We're not actually related, but she like studied abroad in my high school. And of course, if you studied abroad in my high school way back in the day, you were a white South African, because only white South Africans could do that, which is so weird that she was at my high school because it's a small high school. But yeah, so she told me, and what are the chances that she was in Cape Town too, like where I was studying abroad? That's so wild.
That's insane.
Yeah, but anyway, she was telling me, because she was like a young girl, like teenager-ish, when it was going on, that like the world starting to put sanctions on them. And she told me that she was traveling with her family. They were yachting. Like, the fact that your family owns a yacht is like, so they were traveling the world on their boat, and they like arrived in South America, and they wouldn't let her in. Like, they wouldn't let them in because they were South Africans. Like, she had her South African passport, and they were like, no. And she was like, okay, it's funny because she was like, how like terrible, like, she's telling me this, and you have to remember, she is like old, grew up in apartheid, white South African. Like, you have to remember, this is like, to her, like, she grew up on that mindset, so it's hard for her to like, not saying that like, oh, we should sympathize, it's hard for her, but like, this is, you have to remember, like, she has that bias. So
And
he
like
was
the whole
like,
country was thinking that way, you know, like
exactly. And she was telling me, she was explaining to me that like they wouldn't let her in. And like, I think she wanted me to react like, oh my God, that's horrible. Like, they wouldn't let you into the country because of your nationality. Like, what was apartheid? What was apartheid? Like,
oh, you face discrimination. Oh, like
I'm sorry, like the whole segregation thing, like, yeah. I was like, bro, I don't know what you want me to say here. Like, I think they did a good thing to not let you guys in. So anyways,
wow.
um, so amid the growing domestic and international pressure, with the fears of a racial civil war, because it was gonna come.
Yeah.
So in 1991, the government of President F.W. de Klerk, who was a part of the National Party, which is the people who started apartheid, he was like, we gotta do something. So he starts the initiative to begin to repeal most of the legislation that provided the basis of apartheid.
Wow.
And so part of that, like taking the step forward, was releasing Nelson Mandela from prison. So he gets released in 1990 at the age of 71.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And they start negotiating between Nelson Mandela and so Nelson Mandela still leads like the ANC, right? Like the African National Congress, which is like the Black Congressional Party that was fighting for rights that they weren't like really in the government yet, but they were still like an organization. So they start to negotiate between the National Party and the African National Congress are negotiating. And slowly apartheid begins to end. So on April 27th, 1994, South Africa holds its first multiracial election with full enfranchisement. So that means everyone has the right to vote, because this might not have been clear earlier, but yeah, they definitely did not have the right to vote. Like the government was whites only. So no one could vote. It's just white people. But now everyone can vote in South Africa, and which is huge. Vote 2020 if you haven't.
Yeah, don't forget to vote. Oh my gosh. Well, also, okay, because the whites in South Africa are the minority too. So as soon as this election happens and everyone can vote, yeah.
Yeah, that's why you didn't have the right to vote, because there's no way they'd win if everyone could vote. So yeah, and it's not bipartisan either in South Africa. There's a lot of different congressional parties now that are up for election, and the African National the African National Congress Party wins the election with 62% of the votes. So that's like huge, because there were several different congressional parties too.
And 62% is a lot. Wow.
Literally, yeah. And Nelson Mandela becomes president. Yay!
I'm like getting chills.
Mm-hmm. So in May 1996, which is literally like, that's the year I was born, like a little earlier before I was born, the new South African Constitution is made. So anyways, like Nelson Mandela is elected. Then 2 years later, they make the new South African Constitution. And this protects the rights of people inside the country, and it explains their obligations. And it defines the institutions of South Africa, what their powers are, and how they may use their powers. So, like putting some checks and balances in on the government. And President de Klerk and activist Nelson Mandela later win the Nobel Peace Prize for their work creating a new constitution for South Africa.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, so... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'm just like we talked about in our episode on the Middle East and the Arab Spring, like the importance of institutions when it comes to like changes in government and like changes in constitution. Like the fact that the ANC, despite everything like holding them back and oppressing them, they were still able to like establish this really strong, or like a strong political group, even if they didn't have power in the government yet. Like they still were like a strong organization, and then like because of that they're able to successfully put together this like new constitution, so it's just really, really incredible that they do that, even though like every single aspect of their life was being oppressed and like controlled and limited. So
yeah, well, they were getting trained from a very young age. Like I think it's important to remember, like for our listeners, that like people didn't take this sitting down. Like obviously the white people use force and like weapons and like literally murdering and killing people, but people never took it sitting down. Like people have always been trying to fight up. So Nelson Mandela was like getting crafted like since he was young to like be a leader and think about how we can like move South Africa forward.
Yeah, and there would be no Nelson Mandela if it wasn't for like the people who came before him and like helped. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's when like apartheid officially ended. Of course, though, there are lasting effects. So Oh, I also have an interesting side note. When I was in South Africa, one of my uncles, and you just refer to him as an uncle, who was colored, he was telling me, and he was older, right? So I was asking him about apartheid as well. And he told me that when Nelson Mandela got elected, one of the, like, a lot of people were saying that they wanted, like, a lot of people in the ANC basically were like encouraging, and they wanted the South African army to basically massacre all of the white people, like just get rid of them, like complete kill them all off. And Nelson Mandela said, like, no. He was like, if we do that, we're going to take like a million steps back. And he was like, in order for us, which it's in like his big like inauguration speech, but he says that, like, in order to move forward as a country, Mandela knew that the country had to move forward without bitterness. Because if you move forward with that, like, bitterness, then you can't unite, because there's still going to be white South Africans, right? Like, you, and there's still white people in the world. You have to find a way to work together, and that's not going to happen if you seek revenge like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, Nelson Mandela is just like amazing, because you like, it's, he was in prison for 30 years almost, and he was like, no, like, we have to move forward, we have to forgive, and we have to come together.
You have to be such a strong and like incredible person to, I don't like, how do you not have so much like hate and anger towards a whole group of people? And like, yeah, I can't imagine, like, yeah, you just have to be so strong, and that's like an incredible lesson for like all these countries. And yeah, like going through changes, like you can't fight discrimination with like other discrimination, like it's just gonna be a cycle. And like, wow, like, yeah,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
definitely. He's a way better leader than I am. I was like, okay, but like, no, that's you should not do that.
Oh, I'd just be so angry, with
Yeah,
everything.
I'd have a really hard time like not resenting anyone, you know.
uh,
So really admirable. But like, unfortunately, there are lasting effects of apartheid that are definitely still seen today. Like, apartheid was so recent. So some of which, just like based on my experience from being there last year, it's like very dangerous. Like, there's a lot of crimes because there's a lot of poverty. So especially for the Black community and the colored community, it's just not super safe in South Africa. um like, anytime that I would go, even just like walking by myself, like, I would just call an Uber instead, because it's just not worth the risk, because robberies and like petty crime and theft happen so often. And there's also like a gender violence issue, which I didn't realize. It was like really beautiful because, okay, I was working at like a place called PASOP. It's called People Against Suffering, Oppression, and Poverty, which you should go to pasop.org/ZA. Actually, I'll link it. But you should go to their website and donate, because they're a great organization. I love them. But yeah, PASOP is like a human rights organization, a nonprofit that works to like help refugees with like legally entering the country and staying there and getting everything they need done, because a lot of refugees and people seeking asylum, like, it's hard for them to navigate a new country, and a lot of them don't speak English that well. And so anyways, I worked for them. But as part of working for them, like, there was a huge gender violence issue that was and is still happening in South Africa. And the president actually was going to give like a speech to address it while I was there. So like, my boss was like, you can go if you want. So I got to go into parliament and literally see the president of South Africa. His name right now, it's Cyril Ramaphosa. And he gave a speech like addressing it. And then I got to see all the political parties literally like have their meeting and like basically present on their thoughts for solutions, their thoughts on the situation. And yeah, and it was because like recently, like, a white, not a white girl, sorry, a girl was like traveling to the post office, and on her way in broad daylight she was like kidnapped, beaten up, raped, and like killed. And so it was like it's a huge problem in South Africa, and so they were addressing it. And One of the presenters, I don't remember if this presenter or not, but they're saying like this is also a result of apartheid, because it's like years of abuse to these, like, to groups of people, especially men, so they feel that they have to like prove their masculinity by asserting strength over women. So it's a lasting like domestic violence, gender discrimination problem that is a result of being like the inferior for so long.
Wow.
Which I was like, that's a very interesting perspective. So
Yeah. That's like such a complex issue.
mhm.
It's like one of those effects that I don't know, I wouldn't have thought of that, but it makes sense.
No,
Because yeah,
literally.
like again, it impacts every single aspect of your life and the children's life and future generations. So.
Yeah, there's like a lot more like impact than you might think with
Yeah.
these things. It's not just like slavery was bad. Like there's a lot that happens, and like segregation's bad. Like a lot happens later because of it. So anyways, another really big thing you can see is that there's a huge difference between where people live, of course. So in which is like getting into what you were asking earlier. So if you go to a white person's house, like I got to stay with my South African auntie, and she's white, of course. So I got to stay at her house, and it's just like our houses. Like it looks like America, like suburbia. And it's beautiful. Like you can see the beach, like you can see the mountains. It's like, yeah, the houses are really nice. Bars on the windows though, because it's like a lot of crime. But yeah, she like it's beautiful. And then right across the street, it's not even like off, like it's across the street. You see slums. So just like very like poor housing area. It's like it definitely looks like dirty, not a lot of stuff going, and like very run down. That's where colored people live. Okay, so like you're just like one step below. Then I didn't even see where black people lived till I went on like a safari, and I like would drive into the safari. We had to like go out of Cape Town, and yeah, they live in tin houses. Like it's black people live in like a shed with it made of tin, and then there's like a little satellite, what are they called? Yeah, like a satellite, was this not satellite? Yeah, like a
Satellite.
satellite dish. Like a satellite dish, some wires, but yeah, it's literally a tin shed. And I was like, and
God.
the thing is too, if you talk to like I talked to my uncle who's colored and my auntie who was white, and I didn't really get to meet any like black South Africans, at least who had experienced apartheid. I obviously had like black South Africans who were my age, but like as far as like adults, I didn't get to talk to them. But if you talk to a colored or white person, sometimes like they'll say like, oh, apartheid wasn't that bad, and I was like, yeah, maybe for you it wasn't that bad. Like it's like you're not on the bottom. Like the bottom was probably horrible.
Yeah, the white South African's like, no, I was doing pretty well. I don't know what.
Yeah, she was like, it wasn't that bad. And she's like, honestly, like I think South Africa got worse because it's. And I was like, don't say that. Like, please don't finish that. Like, I don't want to hear it. So yeah, it's a lot. And then they also have, since I was working for like a refugee organization, yeah, there's huge xenophobia issues. So lots and lots of like just being scared of foreigners, not wanting to like help people who are like seeking asylum. They're having a refugee crisis. They had a huge refugee crisis right when I was leaving, which was like really hard. And like if you ever like meet someone who's like seeking asylum, you hear their stories, it's like, oh my, it's like it's real. People really go through
Yeah.
horrible things, and they're like our age. Like it's you don't it's still going on.
Like,
Yeah,
like, just to clarify, but like it's like refugee crisis, as in people from neighboring countries who are seeking asylum in South Africa.
absolutely. Yes, that's what it is.
But just yeah,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, like so, yeah, like the xenophobia thing, like of because it is 90s, like what 96? That's the year it ended, 96.
94 it ended, and then 96 we get a new constitution. Actually, no. Yeah, 91 they're starting to repeal it, but I would say like 94 when Nelson Mandela got elected, I would say it like ended.
Yeah, so like early 90s, like that's insane. And yeah, there's no way they're just gonna be like, okay, I don't know, like that's gonna take so long. How do you even solve that? Like, how do you fix that? Like, how do you try to like eradicate xenophobia? I don't even know. Like, especially if it's like apartheid had lasted for so long, and like if you're a white person, you probably never even like had a real interaction with like a non-white person, you know? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Because how would you? Like, they mix. Also, too, I forgot to add, but like, you would also get in trouble, like, as a white person for advocating for like anti-apartheid
Yeah.
things. So it was like against the law to even, yeah, to be like, you know what? I think like we should give people their rights. Like, that's no, you can't say that.
Yeah. Also, like I don't know if you found this in your research, but I'm pretty sure like the government like they censored like all of their media pretty much. So you like South Africans couldn't access the news easily like from other countries, you know, like the government was censoring everything. If I if you want to like gain another interesting perspective on the apartheid in South Africa, everyone should watch the documentary Searching for Sugar Man. It won an Academy Award.
Is
It's
that
one
the one we watched together?
of the one we watched in China.
Yeah.
Documentary about like one of my favorite artists. His name is Rodriguez, and he's from America. Um, and he was like not famous in America at all. Like he kind of has like Bob Dylan vibes. And like he like didn't gain any success in America. And then like a couple decades later, he finds out that he had been like insanely famous in South Africa. Like he was on like the same level as like Elvis, and like they loved him. And like it had to do with like the apartheid everything. So you guys, I don't want to like spoil too much, but everyone should check out that documentary because they talk a lot about the transition after apartheid. So it's a great movie. And
Yeah, good plug. I remember that one.
yeah,
Yeah, so basically, yeah, just like wrapping up to unemployment is still around like 25% in South Africa. So they just have a lot they have to work with right now. And there's always rolling blackouts, which prevent the country from moving forward economically. So the rolling blackout is like basically just like huge slabs of the country will lose electricity for like extensive amounts of time. Anyways, that is a very, very, very brief history of apartheid. We went very long. I'm gonna have to cut down like a lot of stuff. But yeah, and I hope the audio turns out okay. But basically, yeah, that's like a little insight into apartheid. I encourage everyone to like read more about it and just remember why we don't do things like that. And yeah.
yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing. Like that's so stuff like this is like so important to be educated on and like know like the effects and like just I don't know. It ended in the 90s, so that's just such a weird yeah, that's just such a strange thing to think about. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing. This was a good one. This is a good episode.
Thank you. Yeah. And I also just want to add on your point. Yeah. I think if you take away anything from this episode, I think it's important to just remember like how recent that was, how like these issues are not in the past, like issues of xenophobia, issues of wanting to separate from others and like form an enemy is an ongoing issue. And the reason apartheid ended, it was not like the government had a change of heart. It's because external pressures were placed. So always stand up for what you believe in and never like don't put up with injustice if it's wrong. So
Yeah.